Hi, my name is Ben Atkinson, and welcome to Season 2 of the Functional Health Podcast. I'm trained in both biomedical science and nutrition, and I firmly believe that a holistic and functional approach to health is fundamental to our well-being. I interview some of the leading voices in nutrition and lifestyle medicine, from practitioners to professors and everyone in between. With this podcast, I will share with you their stories, their expertise, and their advice, shedding light on the industry from each of their perspectives and providing you with simple tips and tricks to help improve your health from today. This week, I'm delighted to be speaking with Miguel Toribio-Mateas. Miguel is an experienced and highly sought-after nutritional therapist and a chair of the British Association of Applied Nutrition and Lifestyle Medicine. With a degree in nutritional medicine, masters in clinical neuroscience, and pursuing a doctorate in nutritional neuroscience, I'm extremely excited to talk with him today about all things gut health and mental well-being. So, without further ado, Miguel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with you today.
So Miguel, how does your story begin in the field of nutrition?
Well, it goes back to growing as part of a family where my mom never really gave me any. I think the first time I ate something like pizza or burger or something, I must have been in my teens. So all through my early life, I was fed homemade food that was cooked from scratch 3 times a day, kind of thing. That one of those mothers like that, and quite varied as well. So when I first came to the UK, and that's nearly 25 years ago, it was a bit of a cultural shock in terms of the different focus on food. I think it's changed a lot. People talk about food and nutrition all the time, whereas in my culture originally, it's part of life. People take like 3 hours to eat, and they take a delight in taking a long lunch and, loads of plates and colors and diversity. So I've always been attracted to that. And as you know, diversity is very important in terms of when you're talking about gut health, and diversity of bugs, of bacteria or microbes in your gut is very well reported in scientific literature. And there's a correlation between, or a relationship between, that diversity in your microbes that live inside you and what you feed yourself. So yeah, it goes back a long time. It goes back to just being part of that kind of nourishing family that gave me lovely Mediterranean food when I was a child. So it's always resonated with me that you can use food to help you stay happy and healthy and to seek comfort in without having to be a Nutella on toast.
Yeah, absolutely. And what motivated you to start learning about gut health and the microbiome? Was it something that you've experienced in the past?
It wasn't particularly anything to do with me, with my health. I know some people have their own journeys and they go into exploring those because they suffered from something like IBS or something like that. I had done some of the modules that I had learned during my first degree in nutrition had to do with the gut already, so I was quite keen to explore that. And I worked in some of these health retreats when I was a student. So even from the first year, I was doing health retreats in Spain, just observing and helping. And there was a lot of work done in the gut, and working with trying to poo more, basically eating more vegetables, so you kind of excrete more toxins or whatever. So that kind of was an early exposure to that kind of world. But it was probably working with Professor Tim Spector at King's College. So Tim Spector is now running this trial called the PREDICT study. It's a randomized controlled trial trying to work out whether there's an association between the foods that you eat and the bacteria in your gut, but also your blood sugar levels, measuring that with a device that you wear, one of those wearable things that is like a nicotine patch with a Bluetooth sensor that sends information to your mobile about your blood sugar levels all the time. So before that came into place, there was a process of setting up this project called Map My Gut that took probably over 2 years to develop into maturity, and it was based at King's with Tim running it, and I was involved with him trying to suss out the appetite from people who don't necessarily go to a clinician,
Yes.
to kind of like direct to consumer stool tests or poo tests to try and work out whether people needed to go through a clinician or they could interpret the results themselves, what kind of
Right.
support they needed from from the microbiologist, and all of this kind of stuff. It was a very interesting research project, and I was involved in it for a couple of years working with him, and that gave me a lot of exposure to this kind of thing and to hundreds and hundreds of different tests by different people. So that was my kind of baptism of fire of the microbiome, really.
Was that study in twins? Because I understand twins have even though they have the same genetics, their gut microbiome can be vastly different.
So yeah, so the reason why Tim became the person to go to for the microbiome is because he's a professor of genetics, so he pretty well knew that we're about 95% the same, you and I, and me and somebody in Japan, we're 95% the same. But me and somebody in Japan are likely to be just 30% the same when it comes to our gut bacteria.
Wow, yes.
Probably because you and I live in the same city, we probably share about 40% because we eat the same foods, so the same kind of like range of foods. We live in the same country, so we breathe in pretty much the same air and drinking the same water. So those kind of environmental factors have got an impact on that kind of stuff. So he started to realize that even twins have got that difference and started to document that. And he's written probably hundreds of papers now. I've been involved in hundreds of papers now about that kind of subject. So the PREDICT studies, the first phase is based on the twins on his database. So he's got about 14,000 people in that database. And I think the next phase is going to be people who are not necessarily twins. So, yeah.
And we know the gut microbiome is essential to digestive function. What are the common causes of gut dysbiosis and gut hyperpermeability?
So gut dysbiosis, for those who may not know what it means, it's basically an imbalanced kind of population of bacteria. So you've got these groups of bacteria living in your gut. We're talking just about bacteria. Really, we should be talking about all sorts of microorganisms, so like bugs living in your gut, but we refer mostly to bacteria. So we've got these families of bacteria living in the gut, and depending on what you're feeding them, some of them may be thinking, okay, oh great, that same salad from the shop around the corner that's got the things that I like, a bit of tomato, a bit of salad leaves, whatever. If you feed yourself that same salad every day, some of those families in your gut are going to thrive. Some of the families that don't like salad and tomatoes are going to start going down in numbers.
Right.
So if that continues for a certain amount of time, and then you add in things like ultra processed foods, like rich in sugar and probably saturated fats combined, things like, junk food from, fast food shops and things like that, or cakes and biscuits and all this kind of stuff.
The standard American, standard British diets.
Exactly. So if you add all of those foods that are not really ideal for consumption on a regular basis for your gut flora, what happens is that some of those families that really like that quick access to energy and quick access to sugar are going to really thrive. And the gut is like a room with 4 walls and limited space. And if you have some families getting excited and growing in numbers, they are going to crowd out the families that don't really like that food, and they can take over. So this is what happens in dysbiosis. You look at the results of somebody's stool test, and you see that some families have actually gone off the roof, they've gone off the scale, or they are really high in numbers, and some other families have taken a step back, have basically been crowded out by those that have taken over the space. Because as I said, it's a limited amount of space, and not all families can be really high in numbers. If they are, then you'll know, because you'll be probably suffering from bloating and so on as a result, because they're all living and breathing inside you.
I know you mentioned it earlier that this gut diversity is extremely important. From what you've just said there about the bloating, is it possible to have too many species of bacteria within your gut or not?
It's possible to have too many numbers
In terms of colonies?
Yeah, so it's more it's more about the abundance of each of the colonies as opposed to the diversity. I haven't seen anybody with too much diversity, to be quite honest. Even in the days of Map My Gut, where there was this kind of formula to calculate the diversity that was like a flat line with split in four, so quartiles.
Yes.
Most people were in the middle and down, as opposed to in the middle and up. So most people had around 50% diversity. Very few people were in that third, and very, very, very few people were on the fourth quartile. So I only had, when I spoke to about 200 different people in kind of interviews with them about the test, and I don't know that I had to say to somebody, you have too much diversity in any of those cases.
Did that increased diversity lead to better health outcomes, or did these patients or clinicians or people participating in the study, did they seem healthier?
So it wasn't a study, it was more of an observation, and there wasn't an ability to associate the health outcomes, really. It was just, just me making notes or somebody else making notes. That is, however, what I'm doing at the London Agri-Food Innovation Clinic, LAFIC, which is a research program funded by the European Union, how is it called? The European Development and Regeneration Fund, and is hosted at London South Bank University. And we're running, to start with, 2, potentially 3 randomized controlled trials to try and find relationships between your gut bacteria and mental health outcomes, more on the cognitive side. So basically on things like mood, recall, working memory, that kind of stuff, as opposed to diagnosed conditions like depression and so on. So there could be maybe some idea of anxiety or, related to mood, but without getting into the diagnosed conditions like the full-on depression and so on. So that at that point we will be looking at what's going on in the gut, and asking people how they feel. So there are certain tests that are psychology tests that are validated, that are based on a questionnaire, like this thing called the Cyclops questionnaire. That is,
and what does that entail?
It's a validated tool, and basically it's got various different questions about your mental health, and you rate yourself based on a scale on the day. So it could be your mood, and it could be as good as it can get or as bad as it can get. And so if you have an idea of how you're feeling today, and then we run a test and we measure your microbiome or your gut bacteria, or whatever you want to call it, and we have that we store that in a cupboard, and then you go away and you drink kefir, or drink kombucha, or eat kimchi or sauerkraut or more chickpeas or whatever, and you document that, aided by a scientist. So we get all of that information, and then we test your gut flora again 3 months later. 2 months later, we're kind of like working out how we're going to do it. At the moment, we're kind of like setting up the methodology. So and ask you again, so how do you feel today? And it would be the same question, so we can compare. So 3 months ago, in terms of mood, you felt pretty low.
Yes.
And 3 months later, you've been drinking kefir, let's say, and we have a look at your gut bacteria. Something has changed and your mood has improved. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to work out there.
Because recently there's been a huge or a big push on mental health awareness. And with that, the idea that you can eat to affect depressive symptoms. Now, have you seen any dietary changes which have the biggest benefit to the microbiome as it pertains to depressive symptoms or neurological conditions?
So there's the science on the microbiome and the relationship with the brain is it's fairly emerging science. So particularly when it comes to humans. So when you talk about mice, there's hundreds of papers,
Right.
and so we know in theory how things are happening because they've been tested in a test tube. So we know that molecule A goes into receptor B, and we know the process, kind of the mechanism of action. Why is this happening?
Yes.
Then we go on to the next step and we test it in a mouse, and and we work out that the mouse gets less lost in a maze, or or remembers more where to go and get like the food or something like that.
Yes.
But obviously we're a little bit more complicated than a mouse, I like to think.
Yeah.
So the clinical data is slowly coming into, it's emerging slowly. And at the moment there isn't one definitive way that we know is best to eat for mental health in terms of how you feed them through the microbiome. So if you eat this food, then your microbiome will change and your depression will go away. We have these theories. What tends to have a good cognitive impact is something along the lines of a Mediterranean diet pattern. And I say a pattern because it's not a diet. It's not the Mediterranean diet book by Dr. blah blah blah, which is just one way of eating.
Yes.
It's a Mediterranean pattern that I like to think a bit like what my mum fed me when I was a child, before social media and before Instagram, before, nutrition books and nutrition celebrities.
Yes.
It was what my mum, who is 82 now, knew from her childhood were healthy foods for a family. So there was always plenty of vegetables, some fruit, but not like eating fruit all day. You ate a couple of pieces of fruit, some dairy, so there was cheese, probably whole grains, but not masses of them as well, because some Mediterranean diet pyramids seem to just have loads of bread at the bottom and whole grains. And in my experience, that's not the case in all Mediterranean countries. And just looking at Spain, for example, just as a country itself, not the whole of Spain eats the same, depending on the region, because some regions are very cold and some regions are very hot. If you're in Andalusia at the bottom, you may want to eat more salads because it's 35 degrees in like November. But if you're in the mountains where it's -5 in October, then you probably want to eat something a bit more substantial. So there's lots of differences.
Yes.
So anyway, I think the variety is key in the Mediterranean diet pattern. Lots of colors, lots of sources of fiber from different things, like onions and salads and some potatoes and sweet potatoes, all sorts of different things.
And I suppose those colours, they relate to certain polyphenols or plant chemicals within the food. I spoke to Deanna Minnick recently.
All right, okay, yes.
And she has this artistic kind of spiritual element to certain foods and how colours relate to our bodies and our mental state as well.
I love Deanna. I'm a big fan. So she's a lovely person as well.
Absolutely.
So there is that. So from a less kind of a spiritual kind of a point of view, you have in the tangible world, you have two things that feed the gut bacteria. So you've got the fiber that you can see with the naked eye. So if you get an onion or a leek, you've got fiber in there. If you get lentils, you see the fiber, you see the shell of the lentil, the kind of and then you see the thing that comes out of the shell. You get quinoa, you see when it bubbles when you boil it, you see the rice is kind of all fiber. So you see all of these kind of like things with the naked eye. And then you have the polyphenols, or the, in the old world of talking about science, the antioxidants.
Yes.
They are very much bound to the colors. So every color will give you that pigment in the color carries different nutrients, micronutrients that are, polyphenols, flavonols, flavonols, flavonoids, whatever name you want to give them, different names for different foods. And they all have a function that, yes, it is antioxidant, but that's the old school of looking at them. It's also feeding for the live bacteria in your gut. So your bacteria feed off the fiber from the leek or the onion or the lentils, but they also feed or try to feed from the polyphenols in green tea, for example, or in, the polyphenols in raspberries or in strawberries.
Or dark chocolate, which
Or
is
dark
probably one
chocolate.
of my favorites.
Exactly. So, but when I say they try, because these substances are not really giving them any substance to feed on. It's not like something they can really stick their teeth in and bite a chunk out of. So they try and break them, but they cannot really break them because, in fact, polyphenols are quite complex. They're almost like a toxin that the body needs to deal with. They are processed by the same mechanisms in the body as toxins. So they are xenobiotics in a way. They are these kind of strange things that have come into the body. It's only that they are strange but nice as opposed to strange but nasty.
Yes. Okay.
So, but so your gut bacteria are trying to work them out. So you eat your dark chocolate and your bacteria, your bifidobacteria in your gut or your lactobacilli in your gut are kind of thinking, oh, what is this? That's nice. I'm going to, it's got a bit of sugar because it's dark chocolate with 85%. It's still got 15% sugar. So they eat the sugar. They think, oh, this is nice. Or it's got something else attached to it as well. It's this funny flavonol thing. What is it? They try to play with it. They try to break it down. They cannot really break it down. But in the process of trying to break it down, they're going to produce their own substances, short-chain fatty acids, and
Yes.
amongst them. And those natural substances that are being produced in the gut are very nourishing for the gut itself. So if a bacterium is producing butyrate, for example, which is a short-chain fatty acid, butyrate is a fatty molecule that nourishes the cells in the gut lining. So those cells actually use that for energy and for repair and regeneration. But most of it is absorbed in the gut. Part of it actually goes into systemic circulation, and it goes into your brain, and it goes into your heart. So it's those. So going back to that question, the fiber, yes, the fiber is very important, but the colors of the fiber, because if the fiber you're eating is always the same color, if you're always eating a fiber-rich food, like broccoli, for example, but that's the only fiber-rich food you eat every day, it's not the same as having purple broccoli, that's giving you something different to their green broccoli, potentially. Yes. Different variations. Your gut bacteria like variation. They like a bit of diversity. They're like a city like London with lots of physiognomies and different types of people, some of which will get very excited by a new restaurant opening with Chinese food around the corner. Some of them will hate Chinese food and they will want Moroccan food, so they'll get excited by a Moroccan restaurant.
Are fermented foods efficacious in promoting gut and mental health? I know you touched on them previously, but the science in this area seems to be quite limited.
Yeah, it is patchy, and this is why we're trying to work out at La Fake, at this London Agri-Food Innovation Clinic. So we're going to be working with a couple of fermented foods, and one is going to be a kefir-based food. So at the moment, you can find some papers saying that the effects are limited, whereas some other papers actually just seem to think that they do have a really good beneficial effect.
And just to clarify for the people at home, when we talk about fermented foods, these are things like your sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, kefir, umboshi, if you go really niche.
Yeah, all of those things, or even tamari sauce. But when you look at many of the things that people don't think about as being fermented, if you have a traditional salami, for example, or even jamon, your ham, your Parma ham, it's a piece of meat hung in the fresh air, or even your 28-day Angus steak.
Right,
it's basically it's been matured, basically means it's actually been left in the cold air, in a cold room for 28 days. What do you expect is going to happen? Is going to be fermented. Right. So all of those, there's a bit of fine-tuning to do with regards to fermented foods. It's obviously going to be more difficult to start testing, when you have a combination of those foods. What happens when you have kefir and you have your mature steak,
Or
at the
your
same time.
cheeses, your unpasteurized
Exactly, that's
cheeses.
another one. So cheese, unpasteurized cheese, each of them is going to give you a different type of bacterium. When you asked me about why I came into nutrition, I forgot to say that before I actually trained in nutrition, I was working in scientific publishing for a long time. My background in publishing goes back to the late 90s, and one of the jobs that I did, I was working for a medical publisher, and they did a lot of publishing on food science. So I was a trainer, I was training researchers on how to use medical and scientific databases. And one of my clients was the Food Science Institute in Spain. So they produce a lot of science on cheese because Spain is huge on cheese. There's
Yes.
hundreds of varieties of cheese. And they were, I went to loads of events where like these scientists were getting very excited talking about, two types of bacteria present in a cheese from a specific region of Spain.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you pasteurize cheese, you kill some of the bacteria, which is probably a good thing for certain people, not to be overloaded with bacteria. But at the same time, it may be a bad thing if you want to benefit from those bacteria because they may have nice anti-inflammatory effects. So they may have, it's not all about the bacteria colonizing the gut. It's about what they do in transit through you. And some of them may only stay there for 2 or 3 days and then leave. But while they are inside you, they're actually doing very nice things.
And I realised you took many of the things that we've spoken about already. You touched upon them in your paper that you published in April 2018 in the journal Microorganisms, called "Harnessing the Power of Microbiome Assessment Tools as Part of Neuroprotective Nutrition and Lifestyle Medicine Interventions." That's a big name.
It's a bit of a mouthful, yes.
But I will link to it in the show notes for listeners if they would like to explore that further.
Thank you.
One question that I get asked quite a lot is, in Europe, when you're prescribed antibiotics, which are known to have beneficial effects from fighting certain infections, but they also have effects, quite powerful effects on the gut microbiome in terms of reducing diversity and the colonies within the gut. In Europe, they're given probiotics alongside antibiotics. And in the UK, that doesn't seem to be as widely implemented. What are your comments on that? Is it a good thing to take probiotics with antibiotics?
I would not be averse to taking probiotics after taking antibiotics. I'm unsure as to taking them at the same time, because you could argue that while you're taking the antibiotics, you could also be killing the probiotics.
Right.
But that is from the point of view of colonization. So if you're looking at taking the probiotics because you're simply looking at replacing. So you're thinking, okay, I'm going to take this super strain, super dose probiotic to replace some of the culling that I'm going to be doing with the antibiotics. From that point of view, it may not be that efficacious because you may be killing the probiotics as well. So it's kind of a bit of a red herring. But what the probiotics may be doing is even broken down pieces of bacteria are going to be gently stimulating your immune system, which is another way that has been shown that it happens. So even if you take a probiotic capsule and the probiotic happens to be dead, so the bacteria doesn't rehydrate properly, and it's actually a dead piece of bacteria, the skeleton of the bacteria, the cytoskeleton, actually contains certain proteins that your immune system in the gut is going to pick up, is going to identify, and in doing that is going to be gently stimulated. So I hate this word boosting of the immune system because it's a bit, it's been hyped up and then busted, it's another myth and whatever. And I cannot get into the busting myths kind of silliness, but it's the ability of your body to pick up a signal from these proteins in the skeleton of even the dead bacteria, and to do something with it. And the response is going to be simple things like secretory IgA, which is an immunoglobulin, is the first line of defense of the immune system in the gut, and it's just simply a protein in there that picks up potential threats that are coming through the mouth or in contact with any mucosal tissue, anywhere from the mouth to the anus, and you've got it in your eyes as well, and anywhere that's moist in the body, basically.
Right.
And if that picks up a signal that potentially something is a threat, and potentially a skeleton of a funny bacteria that doesn't quite live in the gut or doesn't quite fit into the catalog of things that your secretary IgA has got in a little pad saying, is this safe or not? If it doesn't quite fit in there because it's kind of broken or something, it's going to just wake it up. So what it does is going to wake up your immune system. It's almost like your immune system having a strong cappuccino, just getting a nice bit of energy and saying, right, well, I need to be a bit more alert.
Okay.
And that probably is a good thing, particularly because you had an infection to start with. So you had an infection that your doctor has given you antibiotics for. So if you alert your immune system to be a bit more prepared for any potential further infections, or to allow you to get rid of that infection and perhaps another associated infections, great. So that's my view. I'm not averse. I'm not really sure that you need them while you are taking the antibiotics. I would probably focus on taking them after taking the antibiotics to just repair and so on.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's certainly a takeaway for myself if I'm ever ill and I'm taking antibiotics. When you're choosing a probiotic, a lot of people take them for general health benefits. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that. And also, should we take ones with as many strains as possible? And does the concentration count, the colony forming units can be billions?
I think taking probiotics is become a bit trivialized, basically, just because you cannot just say take antibiotics or take vitamins. It would be the same thing. If I say to you, you tell me, I feel a bit, a bit flat. I need a bit more energy, and I say, take some vitamins. Well, which one? So it would be the same question to be, that we need to apply to probiotics. So what would you like to achieve? And according to that, match with what the literature is saying. Yes, so if you take a probiotic that is just a general probiotic with 10 strains, it's probably going to be a comparison, again, like a rough comparison with an antibiotic that is a wide spectrum antibiotic that is known to kill 100 different things, as opposed to an antibiotic that is very precisely designed to just kill one type of infection. So some probiotics, because they have 10 different bacteria, are going to be able to do the things that those 10 different bacteria do well, and because they are different, they may do well at lowering cholesterol, lowering inflammation in the gut, potentially making you feel less depressed or happier, all of those things, like fighting fungal infections in the gut, all of those things that they could do. But if you have something that is very targeted as your health goal, so if your cholesterol is high, then take a probiotic that has been shown to lower cholesterol in a clinical trial, potentially. And that way that there's some clinical evidence that what you're doing is right. Or if you want to really stimulate that immunity in the gut and protect that, well, take something that, like a Esbulardi, like a Saccharomyces boulardii, that actually stimulates that secretory IgA, and there's loads of papers on that. So if you want to be more targeted as to how to achieve your goal, taking something that is off the shelf with 10 strains and high dose is going to be, probably is going to be a good thing rather than a bad thing, but it's going to be a bit random as well, because you don't really know what those 10 things are doing.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for explaining that. As you are now on the front lines of research in this area, what do you predict to be the most exciting discoveries or findings that will come out soon?
Well, I'm hoping in the next 5 years we'll have a better understanding of the relationship between the gut and the brain, because a lot of it is based on the theories from, having written that paper that you mentioned, and there's another one that that's going to be coming out soon on same kind of vein. I've reviewed a lot of literature in that area, and some of the neuroanatomy that is referred to in current papers goes back to papers from the 50s that we've known about the relationship between the gut and the brain via the vagus nerve.
Yes.
And